Where I grew up, no one I knew, none of my parents, friends, my parents certainly not, no one had ever had a job in the creative arts. It was not even something you entertained. And so growing up, while I liked movies, and to an extent TV, but TV certainly wasn't what it was today, it wasn't even on my radar as something that you can do for a profession. It was simply the thing you do to distract yourself after school or at night. But I didn't even know that the job of screenwriter existed to aspire to it. And so when I went to college, I didn't even consider a possibility of working in the arts. I thought I'd be a psychiatrist. It seemed like the most interesting version of being a doctor. And I started taking some classes toward that end and was failing miserably at it. I just had no aptitude for science at all. I thought maybe in college it would click, but it was almost the opposite. I was totally lost. And so I pivoted to being an English major because I always liked to read, and I did a little bit of writing for fun, but I wasn't one of those people who kept a journal or did any massive amounts of creative writing. And someone had said to me, you know, if you want to take the easiest class in this school, you should take the intro to film class. You just watch movies all day and write about them. And so I said, well, that sounds fun. So I took an intro to film class. And it was an epiphany in that I never really thought about film as an art form. I really thought about it as purely entertainment. And a lot of the films we saw were arty, right? They were intellectual, but a lot of them were made as entertainment. They were westerns, they were noirs, they were horror movies. But we were approaching them in an academic way and sort of understanding them as an art form in the same way you would approach a novel or a poem or a play. And I became sort of intrigued. But still, the distance between that and having a career in it seemed so unfathomable that I didn't really entertain it. Until my senior year, when I, at that point, decided to double major in film and English, and was making a film, and I wrote the film and directed the film, and I got so much enjoyment out of it, and felt such a sense of accomplishment when I was done, that I spoke to my professor, and I said to her, what do you advise someone who might want to do this for a living? I don't even know where to begin. My parents have no clue. What do you suggest? And she gave me a piece of advice, which I give to all young people who ask me now, what should I do? And she said, look, if you wanted to work in politics, you would be advised to move to DC. If you want to work in film, you really have to move to LA. For the simple reason of there's 100 opportunities there for every one opportunity anywhere else. So you want to give yourself the best odds of success. And so with a friend of mine from school, the two of us moved out to LA, found an apartment. And at this point, I had sort of settled on an idea of what my life was going to be in success, which was that I was going to be a writer-director of small thrillers. That was what my niche I felt was going to be. There was a filmmaker at the time who was very popular named John Dahl, who had made two movies that had done very well. One was called Red Rock West, and one was called The Last Seduction. And I used to say, I want to be John Dahl. I want to make movies of that size and that tone. And so I wrote a script that was very derivative of his kind of writing. And it was awful. I gave it to friends of mine. They didn't even know what to make of it. But someone had given me some other advice, which is, look, at this point in your development, you're best served to just know how the industry works. You're trying to get a foot in the door, but you don't even know what's on the other side of that door. I would get a job in a mailroom somewhere and just get a sense of how the business works. I'm telling you this narrative, by the way, because I do think a lot of people are sort of, they'll hear you're a screenwriter and they'll say, how do you get there from here? Certainly if you don't live in LA, but even in LA, people will say to me, how do you do it? Like, it just seems so distant from the reality that I'm living in. So I'm going to sort of walk you through how I went there and hopefully along the way point out how many bad decisions I could have made or how many accidental good decisions I made and sort of put you through the paces of that. So I got a job in a mailroom through a friend of a friend of a friend. And the job was literally being a mailman. I went to everybody's desk and dropped off their mail and picked up their mail. What this job afforded me, though, was an opportunity to see all the different departments at this production company. So I would stop by the marketing department to drop off their mail, then I would stop by accounting and drop off their mail, then distribution, and finally production. And it became pretty clear to me the people who were working in production were doing the kind of thing that I want to do. And there was a woman there whose job it was was to read scripts and decide whether or not they wanted to buy those scripts. She was the VP of production. She was, to be honest with you, a little bit unapproachable. She was an intimidating person. But one day when I was delivering her mail, I got up the courage to say to her, look, I am trying to become a screenwriter at some point. I think I probably even had the gumption to say a writer-director. And can I read some of these scripts that you're getting and do some what was called coverage, which is like a book report on the script, right? You basically write a page or two synopsizing what the script is about, and then a page of comments, what do I think of the script? And she said, oh my God, it would be a huge favor to me. I can't pay you, but if you're willing to take these scripts home at night, that would be great. So every day after working an 8 or 9 hour day, I would take these scripts home and I'd read 1 or 2 scripts, and I'd stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning writing coverage of these scripts. And it gave me 2 valuable lessons. One was, some of these scripts were terrible, and yet they had covers on them from big agencies. So it sort of demystified for me a little bit the job, right? There are some people who are already at the point that their script is going in, and they have an agent somehow, and the script is not that great. Usually those scripts would never get bought, but once in a while they'd even get bought. I'd read about it elsewhere. Oh, so-and-so sold a script. The other thing, sort of part 2 of that, is sometimes you'd read them and they're great, and you would say, how did this person do it? And you'd sort of walk through the paces of the script, and you'd say, oh, she did this here, that was smarter. So that was helpful. The other thing that was very helpful to me was that it gave me an opportunity to present my writing to this person whose job it was to buy scripts. Granted, the writing was a book report, but the comments gave me an opportunity to show her, at least I understood how movies work, and to what extent a movie succeeds or fails in the script phase. And she became, quite confident in my opinions, and so more scripts came in. At some point, she even said, I'm taking you out of the mailroom, going to get you a desk, and every day you'll just read scripts and write coverage. Which was great for a while. As you can imagine, you get burnt out on that pretty quickly. I probably read 500 scripts, over that period of time. And so finally I said to her, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm getting completely fried. I think I should get a job as a waiter or something and just try to write. But in the meantime, would you read this one script I wrote? And again, it was this terrible script called Innocent Bystander. And it was trying to be this thriller about this one guy who meets another guy, and there's this guy trying to insinuate himself in his life or not. Anyway, she read it and she called me in her office, and I was, of course, all ready to hear how great it was. And she said, I have to tell you something. And again, this is another thing I tell all young people who come to me now and ask, how do I get into it? She said, you have to believe it's good, right? Like, I get why you think it's good. You have to believe that, or else you're never going to go forward. But it's also impossible that it can be good. You're only 23 years old. You're going to get better at this. I can tell there's some spark of ability here, but it's very buried under very bad writing, so it's going to take a while. Don't give up. I can introduce you to a couple of agents. None of them are going to sign you, but you can at least get your name in their Rolodex. And so I met with a few agents. All of them seemed to have been made agents like the day before. They were not much older than I was. And most of them were pretty dismissive. They weren't really anxious to be of any help. One of them said, I kind of get what you were doing here. I agree with Stacy, that was the woman's name. This isn't good enough to sell, but stay in touch. So I went to college, as I said. I went to college at a school called Wesleyan. And at Wesleyan, there's a healthy enough film department. There are other alums who have sort of gotten out to LA, and some of them have actually made careers. So I'd sent my resume out to a few of them. And out of nowhere, I got a call from not the gentleman to whom I'd sent the the resume, but from his wife. And his wife said, I work for a rock star. I won't tell you his name, but we need an assistant. If you're looking for a job that can afford you time to write, you should take this job. Now, this is the first of many points of inflection where I could have been like, no, I need to be a writer. I'm not working for a rock star. I really want to just do the film path, right? This is going to take me off of that path. But then I said to myself, there's probably something to be learned about this world. And truthfully, I was always a big fan of music. It would be interesting to see what this is about. So I said yes. The rock star was this guy, Glenn Frey, who was in the rock band The Eagles. And so I got to hang out in his house and do very menial work for him, dry cleaning, picking up kids from school, etc. But it gave me a lot of time to write. And it also just sort of kept me solvent, right? I didn't have to think about how to pay the rent while I was doing this writing. This agent, every couple of months, I'd write a new script. I'd send it to this agent who was the only one who was nice to me, and I'd say, could you read this? And he would say, it's a little better, and I have to be honest with you, it's still not good enough, keep trying. And I'd say, okay, and I'd go back and back. Finally, I sent him a script and I said, what about this one? And he said, you know what? It's not great, but I think we can maybe sell it on the strength of its idea. It was called Fix, and fix is like what a drug addict needs, a fix, but it also needs to repair. And it was about a guy who was an addict who gets involved in a secretive program that makes addicts want to be super successful, but of course it backfires and he goes through a Jekyll and Hyde type thing. If you've seen the movie Limitless, it's a lot like the movie Limitless, and so that had come after the script. And so, sure enough, this agent did manage to sell the script for me. Sold it for, in Hollywood terms, not a lot of money. In Mark Bomback 1996 terms, like a fortune. So I quit my job with Glenn Fry. I'd been there for about 2 years. I was 25 at the time. And now I was in Hollywood, right? But this is, so most people would hear that story and say, oh my God, you made it. You had your break. You sold the script. And I know a lot of people who have gotten to that point, which is a very difficult point to get to. And it usually is a similar story. It's a confluence of good luck, good timing, a lot of hard work. You probably wrote about 5 or 6 scripts at that point, and something clicked, and someone gave you the shot and bought the thing. Of those people, many, many of them will never work again. They won't have another script in them. That script won't get made. Most scripts, back then the ratio is they buy 10 scripts for every one that got made. So your odds are already stacked against you. I got offered a job, the script sold to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers said, we need someone to do rewriting on a movie called Constantine, which is a movie about an exorcist. It's a comic book movie. I knew nothing about this comic book, never read it, never heard of it, to be honest with you. But in another moment where I could have said, this isn't what I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to write more things like Fix. Instead, by some sixth sense, said, just take the job, it's a job. And I did. And I couldn't have done a worse job on it. The studio called up, they were like, your writing is like hieroglyphics. I got into this really bad pattern of putting ellipses after every sentence when I didn't want to, I wanted to sort of piece of dialogue to trail off, it would just go dot, dot, dot. And the guy's like, I've been reading so many weird punctuations all over the script. I should have been told, you're out of the business at this point. But I had made myself enough available to them to rework it and show them that I wasn't arrogant. I knew I didn't know what I was doing. I told them how much I appreciated the opportunity. I would write drafts for free, just don't fire me. Eventually, of course, I got fired. But I had been in the business now for about 1.5 years. And at that point, I would take other meetings, and my agent was able to say, well, he sold the script to Warner Brothers, and they hired him to rewrite this movie, Constantine, which by some miracle was getting made with Keanu Reeves. Not my draft. They had to redo my draft entirely, but it was getting made. And so I would have a meeting at Fox, and they would say, we want to do a sci-fi movie, but like with a classic storyline. And I wouldn't even think. I would say, Mutiny on the Bounty, but the Bounty is a spaceship instead of a sailing ship from the 1800s. And they would say, great, sold. And then I'd have the task of writing that script. Also terrible. So, but as Malcolm Gladwell, who maybe some of you have heard of, has said very accurately, and he's quoting someone else, you put in your 10,000 hours, and eventually you will get good at the thing you're trying to get good at. There is no shortcut around that. So like, I will say, and I'm not saying this because we live in 2024 and I'm being particularly woke, it was a lot easier to be a white male back then as a screenwriter than any other demographic. And I do think you got a lot more chances than you might have otherwise. I looked the part, right? I went to school at Wesleyan that sounded the part. And so it was easier for me than maybe other people to stay in the game. I would say to my credit, I worked my butt off and I never stopped trying to just keep writing and keep writing. I finally got a script produced of my own. By some miracle, Robert De Niro agreed to be in it. And it was a small thriller, which was sort of what I thought I'd be doing. But it was a little more of a horror movie. And it was called Godsend. And I discourage you from ever watching it. It turned out terrible. That's not one. In fact, I recently had to have a meeting with Robert De Niro, and I reminded him of it, and I could see he was trying to remember that he even had been in the movie. And so, that said, my son at this point had been born. He was already almost 4. My daughter had been born. She was now almost 2. And I was, again, that feeling where you're like, okay, I've done all the things you're supposed to do. I sold the script. I got into the business. I got a movie made. A very famous actor is in it. If I meet people, I can say to them, have you heard of this movie? Back in 2003, people might have heard of it, you know? And but I felt this very dissatisfied. First off, I felt very worried that my career was going to end at any minute. And I also felt very much at sea, that I was sort of just floating and not doing the thing I wanted to do. And I said to my wife at this point, I feel like maybe the X card here is we're living in LA. Maybe if we move back to New York, I'll reconnect with what it is that I like to do about this, because I was sort of feeling like I was just imitating other people's career choices and not making my own. We moved back here. Right before I moved, I'd taken another one of these crazy rewrite jobs that I didn't have any business rewriting on a Bruce Willis movie. But at that point, again, I'd been writing professionally for probably about 6 years or so. And so the work was competent, not good, but competent. And he liked me enough during this process to say to Fox, with whom he was working on trying to figure out a new Die Hard movie, who do you have writing this movie? And they said, oh, we're still looking. He said, you're going to hire this kid. And Fox said, are you crazy? We've seen this movie, Godsend. It's terrible. And this guy has no business working on a Die Hard movie. And I think almost to sort of screw with them, he said, well, who's your second choice to play John McClane, right? That's the star of Die Hard. You're going to hire this kid. So they hired me. And I realized this is the point, right? Either I'm drummed out of the business because you're never going to get a better shot than this, or I rise to the occasion. And I just decided I'm going to do the thing that was not the smartest thing to do, which is leave the city that my professor had told me you must live in and move to Chappaqua, New York. But I had a family that I wanted to sort of raise in a different environment. So this was that point. I could have screwed it up, or I could have embraced this thing that if you had told me when I started out, you'll get a chance to write a Die Hard movie, it had nothing to do with the kind of movies I was trying to write. It had nothing to do, if you had told me when I was 10 years old, I would say, didn't I just see that movie in a movie theater? Like, it has no relationship to my plans. I worked so hard on that, harder than I've ever worked on anything in my life. I turned it in, and I could see they were like, oh, this wasn't supposed to be good, but it's actually good. Like, it feels like a Die Hard movie. And that is what I always point to as the turning point in my career, and it did coincide with me moving to New York. From that point on, I said, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to be doing this, and every job that came along, I would always say, I wouldn't get hung up on, is this what I'm supposed to do? Does this feel like the thing I was meant to do? Instead, I would say, is this an opportunity? If so, let me grab it. And if you looked at my IMDb page, the movies are all over the place. A lot of them are because I wrote Die Hard, and so Die Hard 4, I should say, Live Free or Die Hard. So other opportunities like working on the Planet of the Apes franchise or the Wolverine franchise came along. And then in doing that, I sort of built a career enough that then finally I was able to sort of circle back to what my initial aspirations were, which were smaller thrillers that were a little more intellectual. And in 2020, managed to make a TV show called Defending Jacob, which was very cinematic, I hope. It's basically like an 8-hour movie, set in a suburbia very much like Chappaqua, and exactly the kind of thing that I thought I'd be doing when I first decided I